All characters and events described in this story are fictitious. Any similarities with real people or situations are purely coincidental. Please do not judge strictly. Every author was once a beginner. Write in the comments what city you are from and where you listen to this audio version. Don't forget to like, share your life experiences, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next exciting story. Jackson sat on the couch, staring at the TV, where footage of some old movie was flashing. He didn't follow the plot, he was just trying to distract himself from the endless noise in his head. Work, kids, bills. Normal Friday, normal fatigue. Dishes clinked in the kitchen as Melissa was cooking something, humming a melody under her breath that he didn't recognize. He rubbed his temples and sighed. Everything was as always. Almost. Melissa's phone was on the coffee table. She left it there before going to the bathroom. Jackson glanced at him briefly, not paying attention. But the screen suddenly lit up, and a short notification tone made him turn his head. Message. He wasn't going to look, it wasn't his business. But the sender's name, Dan, appeared clearly enough to attract attention. Dan? Who is Dan? Colleague? Friend? Jackson frowned. He didn't remember Melissa mentioning any Dan. The screen went dark, but curiosity was already stirring somewhere inside. He glanced towards the bathroom. The water was still noisy. The door was closed. This is stupid, he thought, rubbing his hands on his jeans. But the hands themselves reached for the phone. He took it, turned it over, unlocked it. He had known the code for a long time, Grace's birthday. The screen blinked to reveal Messenger. The first thing he saw made him freeze. Miss you, honey. Yesterday was incredible. When will we see you again? Jackson blinked and reread. My heart sank and my throat went dry. Darling, yesterday. He scrolled higher, his fingers trembling. The messages continued in a chain, one after another, like hammer blows on glass. You're so beautiful when you laugh. I can't wait to hug you again. Jackson won't suspect anything. He's too busy with himself. The last message was sent this morning. Jackson swallowed, feeling the blood pounding in his temples. He put the phone back, trying to wrap his head around what he had just read. This is a mistake. This can't be true. Melissa. Hi, Melissa. The woman with whom he lived for 15 years, gave birth to 2 children, shared joys and quarrels. No, this is nonsense. The bathroom door creaked, and he winced. Melissa came out, wrapped in a towel, with wet hair. She smiled at him, a light, familiar smile. Are you okay? She asked, noticing his intense gaze. You look like you saw a ghost. Jackson opened his mouth, but the words stuck. He looked at her familiar features, at that smile, which now seemed alien, and suddenly everything inside exploded. Who is Dan? The voice sounded hoarse, almost alien. Melissa's smile faltered, but she quickly pulled herself together. Dan, she asked, as if tasting the name. Oh, it's just a colleague. We discussed the project yesterday. He wrote something about work. About work? Jackson stood up, feeling his legs trembling. I miss you, honey. Is it about work? Her face turned pale. She stepped back, clutching the towel. Have you looked at my phone? The voice became harsh, accusing. What the hell, Jackson? This is my personal space. Personal space. He almost shouted, but restrained himself, glancing towards the corridor where the children were sleeping. You sleep with someone behind my back, and I have to respect your personal space. Melissa pressed her lips together, her eyes darting. She was silent for a second, too, then straightened up. Okay, she said coldly. Yes, I have someone. And what? Do you think I'm happy here with you? You are always at work, always tired, always silent. I'm tired of being invisible. Jackson looked at her, not believing his ears. Every word hit like a slap in the face, but he couldn't stop. Invisible? He asked, his voice trembling with rage. I work hard for us, for the children, and you. You're running to some Dan while I'm here trying to hold everything together. Don't you dare put this on me. She raised her voice, throwing the towel onto the chair. You chose this life, Jackson. I don't want her anymore. He froze, looking at her. The woman in front of him was a stranger. Not the Melissa he met in college, not the one who laughed at his stupid jokes, not the one who cried with happiness when Grace was born. It was a different Melissa, and he didn't know her. "Get out," he said quietly but firmly. "What?" She blinked as if she hadn't heard. "Get out of my house. Now." "This is our house," she began, but he interrupted. "Not anymore. Pack your things and go to your Dan. We're done." She looked at him as if expecting him to change his mind. But Jackson turned away, clenching his fists. He heard her snort and the bedroom door slam. Half an hour later, she came out with a suitcase in her hands, giving him one last look, a mixture of anger and something that he could not make out. "You will regret this," she said finally. "I already regret it," he answered without looking at her. "I regret that I trusted you." The door slammed. Silence covered the house, heavy as a concrete slab. Jackson collapsed on the couch, covering his face with his hands. Chaos was spinning in his head. Her words, messages, that damned smile of Dan, which he didn't even see, but already hated. What now? How to tell the children? How to live further? He didn't notice Grace, their 14-year-old daughter, appear in the living room doorway. She stood, wrapped in pajamas, with disheveled hair. "Dad?" The voice was quiet, sleepy. "What's happened? Why did Mom leave?" Jackson raised his head, meeting her gaze. Understanding was already flashing in her eyes. She had heard more than he thought. He swallowed, trying to find the words. "Go to sleep, Grace," he said finally. "We'll talk in the morning." She didn't move, looking at him with concern. "You're getting a divorce, right?" she asked directly. He didn't answer. "I couldn't." He simply nodded, looking at the floor. Grace stood there for a second, then silently left. Jackson was left alone, in the dark, with a buzzing in his ears and an emptiness in his chest. That was the end, and the beginning of something for which he was not at all ready. The words flowed like a river as he tried to comprehend what had happened. He got up, walked around the room, and stopped at the window. Morning came too quickly. Jackson woke up on the couch. His neck was stiff. His eyes were burning from insomnia. The house was quiet. Only the faint sound of water from the kitchen reminded me of life. He rubbed his face with his hands, trying to collect his thoughts. Last night seemed like a dream, a nightmare that wouldn't let go even in reality. But Melissa's suitcase by the door was gone, and so was she. It was real. She left. He stood up, feeling the weight in every step, and wandered to the kitchen. Grace stood at the sink, pouring water into a glass. Her gaze was gloomy, her lips pressed into a thin line. Caleb, the youngest, 8 years old, sat at the table, picking at his bowl of cereal with a spoon. Both were silent. Jackson paused in the doorway, not knowing where to start. "Good morning," he managed, his voice hoarse with fatigue. Grace turned and looked at him. Her eyes were red. She was crying, although she tried to hide it. "Where is Mom?" she asked quietly, but there was steel in her voice. Jackson swallowed. He wanted to lie, to come up with something soft, but the truth came out on its own. "She left. To someone else." Caleb raised his head, the spoon frozen in his hand. "To whom?" he asked, frowning. "I don't know, Cal," Jackson lied, even though the name Dan was pulsing through his head. "It doesn't matter. She won't live with us anymore." Grace threw the glass into the sink, causing water to splash onto the countertop. "It was because of her that everything collapsed, right?" The voice trembled with anger. "She left us for some guy." "Grace," Jackson began, but she interrupted. "Don't protect her. I heard you yesterday. She herself said that she was tired of us. From you. From everything." He took a step towards her, but Grace stepped back, crossing her arms over her chest. "I hate her," she blurted out. "She destroyed our family." Everything was fine until she started lying. Jackson was silent. What could he say? "We'll figure it out," he finally said. "The three of us. We don't need her." Grace, she snorted, but nodded. Caleb looked first at his father, then at his sister, not fully understanding, but feeling that something had broken. Jackson patted him on the shoulder, trying to smile. "Eat your cereal, champ. It's time for us to get ready." The day dragged on slowly, like thick syrup. Jackson took the kids to school, then went to work, an auto repair shop where he fixed cars and tried not to think about how his own life was falling apart. Colleagues noticed his gloom, but no one bothered to ask questions. He was grateful for this. The keys jingled in their hands, oil stained their fingers, and thoughts revolved around one thing. How could she? At lunchtime, he checked his phone. Message from Melissa. Short, without a hint of apology. I'll pick up my things tomorrow. Leave the key under the mat. He clenched his teeth, feeling his anger rise again. Not a word about the children, not a word about what happened yesterday. Just leave the key. As if he was not a husband, but a random neighbor. Jackson threw the phone on the table and went back to work, screwing in the bolts so hard his knuckles cracked. Meanwhile, Melissa was sitting in a cafe outside the city, 10 miles from home. Opposite her is Dan, tall, with light gray hair and a charming smile. She laughed at his joke while sipping her coffee. Freedom was intoxicating. For the first time in years, she felt alive, not constrained by routine, not suppressed by Jackson's silence. Dan took her hand and stroked her fingers. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Very." "Then forget about him. About them. This is your life now." Melissa nodded, but somewhere in the depths a shadow of doubt flashed. Grace, Caleb, their faces flashed before her eyes, but she pushed them away. She deserved it, she told herself. She deserved to be happy. In the evening, Jackson picked up the children from school. Grace was silent the whole way, staring at her phone. Caleb chatted about his day, but he sounded uncertain. At home, Jackson cooked pasta, the only thing he had enough strength for. They ate in silence until Grace put her fork down. "Did she call you?" she asked sharply. "No," Jackson replied. "I just wrote. I want to pick up things." "Let him take it and get lost." Grace stood up, the chair creaking on the floor. "She betrayed us. I don't want to see her." "Grace, she's your mother," he began, but she cut him off. Now she's just nobody." She went to her room, slamming the door. Caleb looked at his father. "And I want Mom to come back," he said quietly. "Why did she leave?" Jackson gripped his fork until his fingers turned white. "Sometimes people do stupid things, Cal. I don't know why, but we can handle it. I promise." Caleb nodded, but there was sadness in his eyes. Jackson looked at him and felt his heart clench. Injustice weighed on my shoulders. He worked hard to give them everything, and Melissa enjoyed herself somewhere with this Dan, as if their family meant nothing. A week has passed. Jackson tried to get his life back on track, but every day was like an obstacle course. In the morning, get up, breakfast, school. During the day, work, calls to clients, dirt under my nails. In the evening, dinner, homework with Caleb, trying to get a word out of Grace. He held on to coffee and stubbornness, but inside everything was shrinking into a ball. Melissa picked up her things on Wednesday. Jackson left the key under the rug, as she asked, and went with the children to the park so as not to see her. When they returned, the bedroom closet was empty, her perfume had disappeared from the bathroom, and her favorite mug was missing from the kitchen. The house became alien, cold. Grace walked past the empty closet, glancing. "It's good that she took her junk," she said dryly. Fewer reminders. Caleb was silent, but Jackson noticed him sneaking an old photo from the shelf, a family photo from last year's vacation. The boy hid it under the pillow, thinking that his father did not see. Work became a refuge, but it wasn't any easier there either. Jackson was working on the engine of an old Ford when his colleague, Tom, tapped him on the shoulder. "Are you okay, Jack?" he asked, wiping his hands with a rag. "You look like you haven't slept in a week." "It's okay," Jackson muttered, without looking up. "Don't fill it up. I heard Melissa moved out. This is true." Jackson clutched the wrench. "Yes, and what?" "Nothing," Tom shrugged. "It's just, if you need to talk, I'm here." "No need," Jackson snapped. He didn't want pity. I didn't want words. Only silence. It was worse at home. Grace closed herself off, answering in monosyllables. Caleb began to cry more often at night, calling for his mother. Jackson sat by his bed, stroking his head, whispering that everything would be fine, but he didn't believe it himself. He was angry at Melissa, at himself, at the world. But anger didn't help. She only drove him deeper into the hole. One evening, he was sitting in the kitchen, looking at an empty bottle of beer. The phone blinked a message from Melissa. "How are the kids doing?" He stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keys. I wanted to write everything I was thinking. How Grace hates her, how Caleb cries, how he himself can barely hold on. But instead, he simply turned off the phone. It's been a month since Melissa left. Jackson held on as best he could, but every day was similar to the previous one, an endless cycle of work, children, and silence. He got up at 6 in the morning, made coffee, cooked breakfast for Grace and Caleb, drove them to school, went to the auto repair shop, fixed cars, returned home, cooked dinner, checked their homework, went to bed, and so on in a circle. Routine became his anchor, and this anchor pulled him to the bottom. He didn't notice how slowly he was burning out. At first, he lost his appetite. He picked at the food, leaving half the plate untouched. Then his sleep became fitful. He woke up at 3 in the morning, looking at the ceiling, until the alarm clock pulled him out of his stupor. Fatigue accumulated like dirt under your fingernails that couldn't be washed off. But he didn't complain. I couldn't. The children needed him, and he had no right to break. Everything changed on Friday. The day started as usual. Jackson stood at the stove, stirring Caleb's oatmeal. Grace was sitting at the table, scrolling through something on her phone. Caleb fiddled with his backpack, trying to fit his math book into it. "Dad, did you buy milk?" Caleb asked, raising his head. "Yes, in the refrigerator," Jackson answered without turning around. "Where is the spoon?" "I can't see my spoon." "In the box, Cal. Find it." Caleb sighed and walked towards the drawer, clinking his cutlery loudly. Grace looked up from her phone. "Will you pick us up early today?" "I have practice at 4, she said. "I'll try." Jackson turned off the stove, feeling his temples begin to throb. "If I'm not late at work." "You're always late," Grace muttered, returning to the screen. He wanted to answer, but remained silent. The words got stuck in my throat. He placed the bowl in front of Caleb, poured himself some coffee, and sat down at the table. His hands were shaking slightly, but he chalked it up to fatigue. Everything is fine. He can handle it. The day at the auto repair shop passed slowly. Jackson was working on an old Toyota, oil changes, filter checks, the routine. Tom, his partner, was chatting about something in the corner, but Jackson wasn't listening. My thoughts were confused. He tightened the bolt, then another, but suddenly noticed that the key was shaking in his hand. He frowned and squeezed it tighter. "Get yourself together," I told myself. At lunchtime, he went out to the backyard of the service to have a snack. A ham sandwich lay in front of him, but he didn't want to eat it. He looked at him, feeling something tighten in his chest. My breathing became uneven. He put his food down and rubbed his face with his hands. Just tired, he thought. But my heart started beating faster, too fast. He stood up and walked along the wall, trying to shake himself. But instead of relief, there came a feeling as if the air had become thick, like water. He inhaled. His chest felt tight. Once again, the same thing. The pulse was thundering in my ears. My palms were sweating. Jackson leaned against the wall, feeling the ground disappear from under his feet. "Damn," he whispered, clenching his fists. "What's wrong with me?" He closed his eyes, trying to calm down. "Breathe. Just breathe." But every breath was like a struggle. Faces flashed before my eyes. Grace, Caleb, Melissa. Her voice echoed in her head. "I'm tired of being invisible." He clenched his teeth, feeling a wave of panic wash over him. He couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The world was narrowing to a point, and he was sure that it would collapse. "Jack." Tom's voice pulled him out of his stupor. "Why are you frozen there?" Jackson opened his eyes and forced himself to straighten up. My heart was still pounding, but air began to return to my lungs. "It's okay," he squeezed out, waving it off. "It's just hot." Tom narrowed his eyes, but nodded. Go drink some water. You look like a ghost. Jackson silently walked into the office, poured water from the cooler, and drank it in one gulp. His hands shook, but he hid them in his pockets. It was a panic attack. He had read about this, but never thought it would happen to him. He is a strong guy, a mechanic, a father. It shouldn't fall apart like that. Has no right. He returned to work, but the rest of the day passed in a blur. Every sound, the clatter of instruments, the voices of colleagues cut on the nerves. He held on with all his might, counting the minutes until the end of his shift. At home, everything was as usual. Grace was sitting in the living room with a textbook. Caleb was drawing something at the kitchen table. Jackson walked in, threw the keys on the shelf, and put on a smile. "How are you guys?" he asked, trying to sound cheerful. "Fine," Grace answered without looking at him. "I drew a car." Caleb ran up, handing him a piece of paper with a crooked sketch. "It's like yours, Dad." "Cool, champ." Jackson patted him on the head, feeling something squeezing inside him again. He turned away, hiding his face. "I'll go cook dinner." He walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and took out a pack of spaghetti. Routine. She was saved. He put water on the stove, but suddenly noticed that his fingers were trembling. My heart started beating again, faster than in the morning. He grabbed the tabletop and closed his eyes. "Not now, not in front of them." "Dad, what are you doing?" Caleb's voice came from behind. Jackson turned around sharply, forcing himself to smile. "Nothing, Cal. Just tired. Go draw, I'll figure it out." Caleb nodded and left. Jackson exhaled, feeling sweat running down his back. He couldn't show them. He couldn't let the kids see that he was on the edge. They already lost their mother. He should be their support, not their ruin. He cooked the spaghetti, poured it into bowls, and added sauce from a jar. Dinner passed in silence. Grace was picking at her food and Caleb was chatting about school, but Jackson was barely listening. Everything inside was trembling like a stretched string. After dinner, he sent the children to bed, and he collapsed on the sofa. The silence at home was oppressive. He turned on the TV, but the sound only irritated him. My heart sped up again, and my breathing became ragged. He stood up, walked around the room, clenched his fists. "Pull yourself together. You're stronger than this." But the body did not listen. He sat down and buried his face in his hands, feeling a wave of panic cover his head. It lasted about 10 minutes, an eternity. Then it let go. He sat there, breathing heavily, his hands wet with sweat. He didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to stop it. But one thing was clear: children should not know about this. He can handle it. Somehow. 1. The night passed without sleep. Jackson lay in bed, staring into the darkness. The fatigue was such that my bones ached, but my thoughts did not allow me to sleep. He thought about Melissa. Where is she now? With Dan? Laughs, drinks wine, lives his free life, and he is here in this house with 2 children and this damned emptiness. Injustice burned. But now something new has been added to it: fear. Fear that he won't last. What will break? Jackson sat in the kitchen, staring at his empty coffee mug. The silence in the house was deafening. The children were asleep upstairs, the TV in the living room was turned off, and only the faint hum of the refrigerator broke the dead silence. After a panic attack the day before, he felt wrung out like a rag, but sleep did not come. Thoughts were spinning, clinging to each other, and suddenly, without warning, he was carried back to those days when it all began, when he still believed that life could be simple and happy. Jackson was then a 25-year-old guy with calloused hands and dreams of his own garage. He worked in a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of town, fixing old pickup trucks and joking with customers. Life was simple: work, beer with friends on Fridays, occasional trips to the lake. He wasn't looking for love. It wasn't that he didn't want to. He just didn't think that she would find him on her own. Melissa showed up at the studio on a hot July day. Her old Honda Civic stalled in the middle of the road, and a tow truck dragged the car to them. Jackson came out from under the lift, wiping his hands with a rag, and saw her short, with dark hair gathered in a casual ponytail, wearing a light sundress that emphasized her tan. She stood at the counter arguing with his boss, Bill. "I'm telling you, it just stalled." Her voice was loud, slightly irritated. "I was driving along calmly, and suddenly, bam, that's it." Bill, fat and balding, shrugged. "Well, let's see. Jack, get on with it, okay?" Jackson nodded and walked over to the car, glancing at the girl. She caught his eye and smiled briefly but warmly. "Thank you for not making me spend the night here," she said, crossing her arms. "I'll try," he replied, grinning. "What happened to her?" "I have no idea. I was driving to work, and suddenly it stalled. Maybe I ran out of gas, but I filled the tank the day before yesterday." He opened the hood and checked the spark plugs and fuel pump. While he was digging, she stood nearby, chatting about the weather, how she hated the heat, about her work at the local library. Jackson listened with half an ear, but her voice lively, was catchy. Half an hour later, he found the problem. The fuel filter was clogged. "Ready," he said, slamming the hood. "You can go. But change the filter, otherwise you will get up again." She looked at him, narrowing her eyes slightly. "How much do I owe?" $20 from you." He wiped his hands on his jeans. "And maybe some coffee sometime. If you want." Melissa laughed purely, without pretense. "What is this, a tackle? And if so," he smiled wider. "Then I'll think about it." She took money out of her wallet and handed it to him. "My name is Melissa, by the way." "Jackson," he took the bills, feeling his heartbeat a little harder. She left, but returned 2 days later, without a car, just like that. With 2 cups of coffee from the diner across the street. They sat on a bench near the workshop, drank coffee, talked about everything and nothing. She said that she loves books, hates getting up early, and dreams of one day going to Italy. He admitted that he loves old cars and once almost drowned his Chevrolet in a lake trying to impress his friends. They laughed, and Jackson realized he wanted to see her again. 2 years later, he proposed to her. Nothing big, he's not the type to put on a show. Just in the evening, after dinner in their small rented apartment, he took a ring out of his jeans pocket and said, "Mel, marry me." She froze with the fork in her hand, then laughed. "Are you serious?" "Yeah," he nodded, feeling his face burn. "So what?" She rushed to him and hugged him so tightly that she almost knocked over the table. "Yes, my fool, of course, yes." The wedding was modest. Several friends, her sister, his mother, a couple of colleagues from the workshop. They got married in a small chapel outside the city and then had a party in a friend's garden. Melissa was in a simple white dress. Jackson was in a suit that he bought at a crossroads for half price. They danced to an old tape recorder, drank cheap wine, and laughed until they cried. Then he thought it was forever. Grace was born a year later. Jackson remembered that day to the smallest detail, how Melissa squeezed his hand in the delivery room, how he first held his daughter in his arms, tiny, with dark fluff on her head. He looked at her and did not believe that this was his child. Him and Melissa. "She looks like you," Melissa said, smiling tiredly from her hospital bed. "I hope your character is good," he answered, kissing her forehead. The first months were difficult. Grace slept poorly, Melissa was tired. Jackson took night shifts to earn money for diapers and rent. But they managed. In the evenings, he came home, took Grace from Melissa, rocked her in his arms until she fell asleep. Melissa was preparing dinner, and they sat at the table, discussing how they would decorate their new apartment once they saved up some money. There were no cracks then, or he didn't see them. Caleb was born 5 years later. By that time, they had moved into a house small, but their own, with a mortgage for 20 years. Jackson opened his own car service. Melissa left the library and got a job in an office to earn more money. Life has sped up. Grace went to kindergarten, Caleb demanded attention, and work absorbed Jackson from morning to night. He remembered one evening Caleb was 3 months old. Grace was capricious and did not want to go to bed. Jackson came home at 9, covered in oil, with a headache from endless calls from clients. Melissa sat in the kitchen, pushing the stroller with Caleb, looking like a ghost pale, with circles under her eyes. "You're late again," she said without looking at him. "The client detained me." He threw the keys on the table and opened the refrigerator. I had to finish it. I should have called. Her voice was even, but there was tension in it. I'm alone with them all day. Grace is screaming. Caleb is awake. I didn't even have time to eat. I didn't do it on purpose, Mel. He took out a beer and slammed the door, tired as a dog. But I don't. She stood up abruptly. The stroller swayed. Have you ever asked how I'm doing? He looked at her, wanted to answer, but remained silent. Fatigue was pressing, and he simply went into the living room, leaving her in the kitchen. This was the first time he felt something crack between them. Not a quarrel, not a scandal, just silence, which became thicker than before. After a couple of years, the cracks became wider. Jackson was drowning in work, the service was growing. There were more clients, but there was barely enough money for the mortgage and bills. Melissa worked overtime, but was at home less and less, either meeting with colleagues or taking some courses. Grace went to school, Caleb went to kindergarten, and she and Jackson saw each other sporadically in the morning at breakfast, in the evening before bed. One day he came home earlier than usual. Melissa sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone with a glass of wine in her hand. The children were already asleep. "Why aren't you sleeping?" he asked, taking off his jacket. "I was waiting for you," she smiled, but somehow tensely. "I wanted to talk." "About what?" He sat down next to him, feeling a catch. "About us," she put down her glass. "Have you noticed that we hardly talk?" "I noticed," he shrugged. "Tired, Mel, work, children. You know." "I know," she looked at him. Her eyes were tired but sharp. "But I don't think you're even trying." "Are you trying?" He didn't want to quarrel, but the words came out on their own. She fell silent, then got up and went into the bedroom. He remained on the sofa, staring into space. Then, for the first time, he thought that maybe she was right. But what to do? He didn't know. The last year before she left was the hardest. Jackson even took orders on weekends to pay off the debt for a new lift in the service. Melissa became cold, not angry, not irritated, just distant. She left home earlier and returned later. She said that she was late at work, but he noticed little things. New perfume, neat makeup that was not there before, calls that she answered in a whisper. One evening, he found her in the bedroom, sitting on the bed, typing something on her phone. Seeing him, she quickly turned off the screen. "Who was it?" he asked, nodding at the phone. "Colleague," she answered too quickly. "For work." He nodded, but something stabbed inside. He didn't ask further, he didn't want a quarrel. But now, looking back, he understood. It was Dan. Even then. Jackson opened his eyes. The kitchen was still the same dark, cold. The memories receded, leaving a bitter aftertaste. He got up, poured water, and drank it in one gulp. How did it come to this? They built a family step by step, through fatigue, through quarrels. And then she just left. She left him with the children, with this house, with these cracks that he didn't notice in time. He walked into the living room and sat down on the sofa. There was a wedding photo of them on the shelf, him in a stupid suit, she with flowers in her hair. He took it and ran his finger along the glass. Where did it all go wrong? Maybe he really was too busy. Maybe she really did feel invisible. But that didn't justify her. Didn't justify Dan. It didn't justify betrayal. He put the frame back, feeling fatigue creep in again. Tomorrow will be a new day. The children will wake up. Life will move on. Jackson was driving along the highway. The morning began with a call from the hospital. His father, Harry, was there with a heart attack. The nurse spoke quickly, dryly. "The condition is stable, but you better come." Jackson hung up, woke up the children, took them to a neighbor, Mrs. Clare, and hit the road. My thoughts were confused. Father, hospital, children, work. Everything fell at once, like an avalanche. Harry wasn't one to complain. At 70, he was still tinkering in his garage, fixing up an old Dodge that hadn't been driven in 10 years. "The heart is like a motor, son," he said, patting himself on the chest. "As long as it's working, don't touch it." Jackson always laughed at this, but now the joke sounded sinister. He wasn't ready to lose his father. Not now, when his world was already falling apart at the seams. The hospital greeted him with the smell of antiseptic and the roar of voices. Jackson walked through the emergency department, said his father's name, and received a room number. The elevator crawled slowly, every second stretched like rubber. He got out on the fourth floor and walked along the corridor, following the signs. Room 412. The door was slightly open, and he heard Harry's weak voice arguing with someone. "I'm telling you, I don't need this damn gel. I'm fine. Give me my pants, and I'll go home." Jackson pushed the door and froze. Harry lay on the bed, connected to the monitor, which beeped steadily and monotonously. The father's face was red with irritation, his gray hair was disheveled. Standing next to him was a short woman, about 40, wearing a blue nurse's uniform. She had blonde hair pulled back into a neat bun and tired but warm eyes. She held a tray with medical supplies in her hands and calmly answered, "Harry, if you get up now, you'll fall right on my head. Lie down, let us finish." "I'm not disabled, Rebecca," Harry barked, but his voice trembled from weakness. "Jack, tell her." Jackson stepped forward, clearing his throat. Dad, maybe you can listen to her. You just got here with a seizure." Harry turned his head, saw his son, and frowned. "What are you doing here? I told them not to call you." "Seriously." Jackson shook his head, coming closer. "You're in the hospital, and I have to sit at home and wait for the news on TV." The woman Rebecca, as Harry called her, looked at Jackson. Her gaze was appraising, but soft. "Are you his son?" she asked, putting the tray on the table. "Yes," he nodded. "Jackson, how is he?" "Stable," she replied, adjusting the Roman 4 in Harry's arm. "The attack was not the most severe, but we are keeping it under observation. Another day or two, and if everything is in order, we'll let you go." "Let me go now," Harry muttered. "I'm not going to lie here while you poke me with your needles." Rebecca smiled, barely noticeable, but sincere. "Harry, you are the most stubborn patient this week. Relax, you need rest." Jackson looked at her, feeling strangely relieved by her calm tone. She didn't argue, didn't get irritated, she just did her job. He sat down on the chair next to the bed, rubbing his neck. "Thank you for looking after him," he said quietly. "He is not easy." "Oh, I noticed." Rebecca glanced at Harry, who snorted in response. "But I'm used to it. My cat at home is the same. He yells if he doesn't like something." Harry rolled his eyes, but the corner of his mouth twitched, revealing a hint of a smile. Jackson found himself smiling a little too. "For the first time in weeks, my chest felt a little lighter." The next hours passed in a strange rhythm. Rebecca came in every half hour to check the monitor, change the Roman 4, and bring water. Harry grumbled, but argued less with her than with the other nurses who flashed around the room. Jackson sat next to him, listened to his father, answered his questions about the children and work. But his thoughts kept returning to the emptiness that settled in him after Melissa left. "How's Grace?" Harry asked when Rebecca came out again. "Still angry at your mother?" Jackson nodded, looking at the floor. "Yes, doesn't even want to talk about her. Caleb asks sometimes, but I don't know what to answer." Harry coughed and leaned back on his pillow. "Damn Melissa," he muttered. "I never thought she would do this. How are you holding up?" "Okay," Jackson lied, clenching his fists in his lap. "The main thing is that the children are okay." Harry looked at him for a long time, studying him. "You've always been stubborn like me," he said finally. "But don't you dare break down, son. They are looking at you." Jackson nodded, but his father's words only increased the pressure in his chest. He didn't want to break, but how not to break down when every day's a struggle? Rebecca returned with a tablet in her hands, writing something down on Harry's chart. She glanced at Jackson. "How long will you be here?" she asked, without looking up from her notes. "Until they kick you out," he tried to joke, but his voice sounded tired. "Then I advise you to take coffee downstairs." She nodded towards the door. "The car there is so-so, but better than nothing. You look like you haven't slept in a week." "Two," he blurted out, and he immediately regretted it. "I didn't want to dump my problems on a stranger." Rebecca looked up but didn't question. She simply nodded. "Then definitely take the coffee, and with sugar you will need it." She left, and Jackson remained sitting, looking after her. Her calmness acted like a balm, not intrusive, not cloying, but simply real. He stood up and patted Harry on the shoulder. "I'll go get some coffee. Don't swear here without me." "I'll try," muttered the father. The coffee machine in the lobby was indeed ancient. It hummed like an old tractor and dispensed Jackson a cup of something that smelled more like burnt rubber than coffee. He added sugar, took a sip, and winced. But the warmth of the drink relieved some of the tension. He was standing at the window, looking out at the parking lot, when he heard footsteps behind him. "I warned you," Rebecca's voice came from nearby. He turned around. She stood a few steps away, holding her glass in her hands apparently. She also decided to take a break. "Yeah," he raised his coffee, grinning. "This is definitely not Italy." "Have you been to Italy?" She raised an eyebrow, coming closer. "No," he shook his head. "I just heard that the coffee there is good. What about you?" "Not either," she smiled, drinking from the glass. "But I dream. Maybe someday." They fell silent, but the silence was not awkward. Jackson looked at her calm face, at the small wrinkles around her eyes, at the way she held the glass with both hands, as if she was warming herself. She wasn't a cover girl, but there was something attractive about her. Maybe it's this confidence, or the way she didn't try to fill the silence with empty words. "Your father is a tough nut to crack," she finally said, looking out the window. "Stubborn, but with character. Looks like you." "At me?" Jackson chuckled. "I'm not that loud." "Maybe not loud," she turned to him, "but keep it the same. I see it in your eyes." He looked away, feeling her words touch something inside him. She didn't know him, didn't know what he'd been through, but her voice, soft, non-judgmental, made him relax. "How long have you been working here?" He asked to change the subject. 7 years, she shrugged. "I'm used to it. People come and go. Some remain in memory." "How is my father?" "Oh, he'll definitely stay," she laughed quietly. "This morning he tried to persuade me to bring him beer instead of water." "Sounds like him." Jackson smiled wider than he expected. They talked a little more about the hospital, about the weather. Harry was in good hands. In the evening, Jackson returned to the ward. Harry was dozing, the monitor was still beeping steadily. Rebecca came in later, checked the indicators, and made a couple of notes. "He's fine," she said, looking at Jackson. "You can go home if you want." "I'll take a look." "Thank you." He stood up, rubbing his neck. "Really, thank you." "You're welcome." She looked at him, holding her gaze slightly. "See you tomorrow?" "Yes," he nodded. "See you." He left the room feeling a little lighter than in the morning. Rebecca was not part of his life, not someone important, just a nurse, a chance meeting. But her voice, her calmness remained with him, like a weak ray of light in this endless darkness. And for the first time in a long time, Jackson thought that maybe all was not lost. Jackson stood at the stove, stirring spaghetti sauce. The smell of tomatoes and garlic filled the kitchen, mixing with the familiar comfort of home. It had been 3 months since Melissa left, and he was finally starting to find rhythm in his new life. Grace was sitting at the table, doing her homework. Caleb was drawing another car on a piece of paper. The silence was not ideal, but calm, the one to which he was accustomed. After the hospital, after meeting Rebecca, something shifted inside him. It's not that he became happy, but there was hope that he would cope. The doorbell broke this fragile peace. Jackson frowned, wiped his hands on a towel, and glanced at the children. Who could it be? He asked, more to himself than to them. Grace shrugged, not looking up from her notebook. Caleb raised his head. "Maybe the postman," he suggested. At 8 o'clock in the evening, Jackson shook his head and walked towards the door. He opened it, and his heart sank. Melissa stood in the doorway. Her dark hair was tousled by the wind, there were dark circles under her eyes, and in her hands she was holding a bag, the same one with which she left 3 months ago. She looked tired, but not broken. Her lips twitched into a faint smile. "Hi, Jack," she said quietly. He froze, clutching the doorknob. Everything inside screamed anger, confusion, pain. He hadn't seen her since the day she picked up her things, and he thought that was the end. But here she stands here on his threshold, as if nothing had happened. What are you doing here? The voice sounded cold, almost alien. I. She hesitated and lowered her gaze. Can I come in? We need to talk. No, he stepped forward, closing the door behind him so that the children would not hear. Talk here. Melissa sighed and slung her bag over her other shoulder. I left Dan, she said, looking into his eyes. It's over. I made a mistake, Jack. Big mistake. He looked at her, not believing his ears. 3 months ago, she left them him, Grace, Caleb for this Dan. And now she's returned like a beaten dog, with this pathetic, I was wrong. Anger rose in his chest, but he restrained himself, gritting his teeth. And what? He asked. You think you can just come back like nothing happened? No, she shook her head. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want to see the children. They're mine, Jack. I'm their mother. You abandoned them. He stepped closer, his voice becoming sharper. You chose your lover and left. And now that he ditched you, did you remember about us? He didn't leave me. Her eyes sparkled. I left myself. I realized what I had done. I want to fix this. To correct? He almost laughed, but the laughter got stuck in his throat. You destroyed the family, Melissa. Do you think this can be fixed with words? She was silent, looking away. A shadow flashed in her eyes, either shame or anger, he couldn't tell. But he didn't care. He didn't want her excuses. Didn't want her at all. Go away, he said finally. This is no place for you. Jack, please, she extended her hand, but stopped when she saw his gaze. I'm not asking for myself. I'm asking for Grace and Caleb. They miss me. Don't you dare speak for them, he raised his voice, but immediately stopped, glancing at the door. You have no idea how they feel. You left, and I was left to clean up this mess. I know, her voice trembled, and I'm sorry, but I'm their mother. I have rights. Are you right? He stepped towards her so close that she retreated. You lost your rights when you started sleeping with that Dan behind my back. Go away, Melissa. I'm serious. She opened her mouth to object, but then the door behind Jackson creaked. He turned around. Grace stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide. Mother? The daughter's voice was quiet, but a mixture of surprise and pain rang in it. Melissa stepped forward, her face softening. Grace, honey, she began, but Grace interrupted. What are you doing here? Her tone became harsh. You left. You abandoned us. I didn't leave you. Melissa extended her hand, but Grace recoiled. I made a mistake, but I came back. I want to be with you. With us? Grace crossed her arms, her eyes narrowed. Where have you been for 3 months? While Dad worked hard, while Caleb cried at night. Were you with this? Jackson put his hand on his daughter's shoulder, trying to calm her down. Grace, come inside, he said quietly. I'll sort it out. No, she shook off his hand. I want her to say. Why did she come back? Because she was abandoned. Melissa turned pale, but didn't look away. No, Grace, I left him on my own, because I realized that my family is you. You are not our family, Grace almost shouted. You betrayed us. Leave. She turned around and went into the house, slamming the door so hard that the windows shook. Jackson looked at Melissa, feeling anger mixed with fatigue. Her words meant nothing not to him, not to Grace. And Caleb. He didn't know it yet, but Jackson wasn't going to let her back into their lives. You heard, he said coldly. Leave. Jack, she stepped closer, her voice becoming pleading. I don't want ships. But if you don't let me see the children, I'll go there. I have rights. He froze, feeling his blood run cold. Court? She's threatening to sue him after everything she's done. He clenched his fists, fighting the urge to tell her everything he thought. Do what you want, he said finally, but you won't come in here. Never. He turned, entered the house, and closed the door, clicking the lock. Melissa remained standing on the porch. He heard her steps, her quiet sigh, but did not turn around. Everything was boiling inside. She left Dan. She's back. But not to him, to the children. And that was the worst of all. She didn't want his forgiveness. She didn't want their family. She only wanted what she lost when she chose someone else. The house was quiet. Jackson walked into the kitchen, turned off the stove. The sauce had cooled. The spaghetti was sticking together. Grace sat on the living room couch with her arms wrapped around her knees. Caleb peeked around the corner, his eyes full of questions. "Was it Mom?" he asked quietly. Jackson nodded, sitting down next to Grace. "Yes, Cal. She came to talk." "Will she come back?" The boy's voice trembled. "No," Grace answered for her father, her tone harsh. "And I don't want her to come back." "Grace," Jackson began, but she cut him off. "She left us, Dad, and now that she was feeling bad, she thought she could just go back." "No, really." Caleb looked at his sister, then at his father. "And I want to see her," he said quietly. "She's a mother." Jackson pressed his lips together, feeling his heart break. Grace hated Melissa. Caleb missed her. And him? He didn't know what he was feeling. Anger? Yes. Pain? Certainly. But most of all, fatigue. He didn't want this war. I didn't want the kids to choose sides. But Melissa left him no choice. "We'll figure it out, Cal," he said finally, patting his son on the head. "Go to bed, okay? We'll talk tomorrow." Caleb nodded and went to his room. Grace remained seated, looking at the floor. "You won't let her back, right?" she asked without looking up. "No," he answered firmly. "Not after everything." She nodded, relief flashing in her eyes. Jackson leaned back on the couch, closing his eyes. "Melissa left, Dan." "Fine. Let it be. But that didn't change what she did. He won't forgive. He won't let me in. For yourself, for the sake of the children. This was his home, his family. And he will protect her, even if it means fighting the one he once loved." The night passed without sleep. Jackson lay in bed, looking at the ceiling. Thoughts about Melissa, about her words, about her threat of court did not go away. She could have done this, gone to court, demanded the right to children. So what then? He didn't know how to win such a battle. But he knew one thing: he would not give up. Not now that he was finally starting to piece his life back together. Melissa won't come back. It's not that simple. Not after everything. Jackson returned from work and was greeted by a man with an envelope in his hands, a thick white envelope with the seal of a law office. He immediately understood what this meant, but when he went into the house and opened it, he was shocked by her impudence. She demanded full custody of Grace and Caleb, the right to the house and alimony. Each word hit like a hammer on a nail, driving him deeper into rage and despair. He threw the letter onto the kitchen table and clenched his fists. Full custody, house, alimony. After she left them for Dan, now she wants to take everything. Jackson walked around the kitchen, trying to wrap his head around it. This was not just betrayal, it was war. She didn't just come back. She decided to destroy what he was trying to preserve. Grace walked into the kitchen, noticed the letter, and frowned. "What is this?" she asked, nodding at the paper. Jackson wanted to put it away, hide it, but Grace had already taken the sheet in her hands. Her eyes ran over the lines, her face turned pale. "She wants to pick us up?" The voice trembled. "And the house, too." "She could want anything," Jackson said, trying to sound calm. "This doesn't mean anything yet." "No, that means—" Grace threw the letter on the table. "She abandoned us, and now she wants to take everything away. I won't go to her. Never." Caleb peeked around the corner, hearing his sister scream. "What's happened?" he asked quietly. Jackson swallowed, walked over to his son, and got down on one knee. "Mom filed for divorce, Cal," he said softly, "and she wants you to live with her." "I don't want to." Caleb shook his head, his eyes sparkling with tears. "I want to stay with you in case she leaves us again." Jackson hugged him, feeling his insides clench. Grace stood nearby, arms crossed, her gaze as hard as steel. "She won't get us," she said. "I'll tell you in court if necessary. I'll stay with you, Dad." He looked at her, then at Caleb. Their words were like a lifeline in this chaos. But he knew that this was not enough. Melissa was serious, and he needed a plan. He needed someone to help him fight. That evening, Jackson called his father. Harry had already left the hospital, but was still weak. The attack had left its mark. Jackson told him everything, about the lawsuit, about Melissa's demands, about the children. Harry listened in silence, only grunting from time to time. "Damn girl," he finally said when Jackson had finished. "I thought she had at least a drop of conscience left, but no." "Okay, son, don't panic. I know one guy, Bob Carter, a lawyer. Tough as nails, but knows his stuff. I'll talk to him." "Thanks, Dad," Jackson breathed. "I don't know what to do. She wants to take everything." "She won't take anything." Harry's voice became firmer. "Hold on, Jack. For the sake of the children, I'll call Bob tomorrow morning." Jackson hung up, feeling faintly relieved. Harry had always been his rock, rough, straightforward, but reliable. If he says Bob will help, then he will. The next day, Harry kept his word. Bob Carter called Jackson at lunchtime. The lawyer's voice was low, confident, with a slight southern accent. "Harry told me your story," he said without preamble. "Your wife has an appetite like a shark, but we will rein her in. Come to my office tomorrow and we'll discuss the details. And grab everything you have, documents for the house, birth certificates of children, correspondence with her. Everything will come in handy." "Okay," Jackson nodded, although Bob couldn't see him. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," the lawyer chuckled. "There is a lot of work. But I love things like this, when the truth is on our side." The meeting with Bob took place in his cramped office in the city center. The man turned out to be short, stocky, with a thick gray mustache and a tenacious gaze. He leafed through the papers that Jackson had brought, made notes, asked questions short, precise. An hour later, he leaned back in his chair and looked at Jackson. "We are in a strong position," he said. "She left her family, went to her lover, and did not appear for 3 months. Children want to stay with you, that's the main thing. The court will take into account their opinion, especially Grace, who listens to children her age. The house has a mortgage, but you paid more, we will prove it. She will not receive alimony, if I understand your salary and her income correctly. But guardianship. Here it can put pressure, but we will fight." "I won't give them up," Jackson said firmly. "No way." "I believe," Bob nodded. "Then get ready. It won't be fast or cheap, but we will win." Jackson left the office with a slight feeling of hope. Bob knew his stuff, and that gave him a chance. But there was still fear bubbling inside. What if Melissa won? What if he loses his children? That evening, he decided to write to Rebecca. After the hospital, they exchanged numbers. She gave him hers, in case Harry decides to play hero again. Jackson didn't think he'd use it then, but now, sitting alone on the couch, he suddenly wanted to hear her voice, her calmness, her support. He opened the messenger, hesitated, then typed. "Hi, it's Jackson. How are you?" The answer came in a couple of minutes. "Hi, I'm fine, just got off duty. How are you? How's Harry?" "Harry is fine, grumbling as always. But not so much. Melissa filed for divorce. I want children, a house, everything." He sent a message and stood there, waiting. A minute later, the phone blinked. "Seriously, after everything she's done, it's just, no words. How are you holding up?" "I'm holding on for now. My father found a lawyer. We'll fight, but it's still hard." "Of course. You're great for not giving up. Are the children with you?" "Yeah, they don't want her, especially Grace. Caleb too, although he gets bored sometimes." "I understand. If anything happens, write to me, okay? I'm not a lawyer, but I can listen." Jackson smiled, feeling the warmth of her words. "Thanks. Maybe we can go somewhere sometime, with the kids and Harry. Take our mind off it." "Good idea. How about a movie? There's a new cartoon. Harry might fall asleep, but the kids will love it." "Agreed. Saturday." "Great. Meet me at the cinema at 6. "Yes, see you later." He put the phone down, feeling the tension release a little. Rebecca didn't bother with advice, didn't push, she was just there, and that was what he needed now. Saturday came quickly. Jackson took Harry from his house. The old man grumbled that cartoons were not for him, but still got into the car. Grace and Caleb were in high spirits. Movies had been a rare pleasure for them in recent months. They arrived at the cinema a little early, and Jackson noticed Rebecca at the entrance. She stood in jeans and a simple jacket, with a slight smile on her face. There was no hospital uniform next to her, and this made her even more real. "Hello," she waved her hand. "Is everyone assembled?" "Yes." Jackson got out of the car and helped Harry get out. "Dad, this is Rebecca. She made sure you didn't escape from the hospital." "Oh, this tormentor," Harry chuckled, but extended his hand to her. "Glad to see you without these needles." "And I'm glad," Rebecca shook his hand. "You look better than in the ward." "Because there's beer at home," Harry winked. Grace and Caleb moved closer. Rebecca leaned towards them. "Hello, guys. I'm Rebecca, a friend of your grandfather and father. Do you like cartoons?" "Yes," Caleb smiled. "And a complete robot?" "I think so," she smiled. "And you, Grace?" "Okay," Grace shrugged, but her gaze was curious. "The main thing is not to get bored." "I promise it won't be." Rebecca straightened up and looked at Jackson. "Shall we go get tickets?" They bought tickets and grabbed popcorn and Cokes. The hall was noisy children, parents, laughter. Jackson sat between Caleb and Harry. Rebecca sat next to Grace. The cartoon began with colorful explosions and jokes, and Caleb was immediately engrossed, giggling at each robot. Grace sat silently at first, but then relaxed, even laughing a couple of times. Harry grumbled that cartoons were better back in his day, but his eyes sparkled. He was clearly enjoying himself. Halfway through the movie, Rebecca leaned over Grace to Jackson. "How do you like it?" she whispered. "It's fun," he smiled. "I haven't rested like this for a long time." "Okay," she nodded. "You deserve it." After the session, they went outside, still discussing the cartoon. Caleb jumped around pretending to be a robot. Grace joked about the main character. Harry declared that "this kid with super strength is the spitting image of my younger self," and everyone laughed. Rebecca suggested going to the cafe across the street to get some ice cream. Jackson agreed, and soon they were sitting at the table, devouring dessert. "You're awesome," Caleb told Rebecca, licking the chocolate off the spoon. "Do you always work with your grandfather?" "Not always," she smiled. "But he's fun. He tried to escape from the ward with Enrollment 4 in his hand." "Seriously?" Grace giggled. "Grandfather, what are you, a ninja?" "Better," Harry winked. "I just don't like being held." Jackson looked at them, feeling the warmth spreading in his chest. For the first time in months, he saw children like this, light, happy. And Rebecca. She fit into this moment so naturally, as if she had always been there. They joked, laughed, and even Harry, despite his grumbling, smiled more often than usual. When they left the cafe, it was already dark. Rebecca turned to Jackson. "Thank you for the evening," she said quietly. "It was great." "Thank you." He looked into her eyes. "You have no idea how much this helped." "I imagine," she smiled. "Right if you need anything. And good luck with the lawyer." "Definitely," he nodded. The evening after the cinema was warm, despite the autumn wind blowing through the streets. Jackson drove the car home, glancing in the rearview mirror at Grace and Caleb. They sat in the back seat, still discussing the cartoon and the ice cream they ate at the cafe with Rebecca and Harry. Harry dozed in the front seat, snoring softly, his head leaning toward the window. Jackson smiled to himself. The old man was tired, but he was doing well all evening. This day, full of laughter and lightness, was like a breath of air after months of suffocation. They arrived home already in the dark. Jackson helped Harry get to the guest room. His father decided to stay the night so as not to drive across town. The children ran upstairs, but Jackson stopped them at the stairs. "Guys, let's talk for a minute," he said, nodding towards the living room, "until you run away." Grace rolled her eyes, but went back down, plopping down on the couch. Caleb jumped next to her, still holding the plastic ice cream cup that he had somehow brought from the cafe. "What is it, Dad?" Grace asked, crossing her arms. "Are you talking about Mom again?" "No," Jackson sat down in the chair opposite, rubbing his palms on his jeans. Not about her. About today. About Rebecca. Caleb raised his head, his eyes widening. "She's great," he said. "She knows her grandfather and laughs at his jokes." "Yes," Jackson nodded, feeling his throat go dry. "She's good. I just wanted to tell you something." Grace narrowed her eyes, her lips twitching into a slight smirk. "What, is this a new mother?" She joked, nudging Caleb. "Did Daddy find himself a girlfriend?" Caleb chuckled, but Jackson felt his face heat up. He raised his hand, shaking his head. "No, Grace, it's not like that," he said quickly. "We're just friends. She helped me with my grandfather in the hospital, and, well, she's just a good person. We communicate with her, and I like it." Grace tilted her head, her grin widening. "Friends, right?" she drawled, clearly teasing. "Why are you blushing like a tomato, then?" "I'm not blushing," he muttered, but immediately caught himself rubbing his neck, a sure sign of awkwardness. "Listen, I'm serious. I just wanted to let you know. She doesn't replace anyone. We are friends, and I feel at ease with her. After everything that happened, this is important to me." Caleb stopped swirling the glass and looked at his father. "Will she still walk with us?" he asked. "She's funny, and I bought ice cream." "Maybe," Jackson smiled, "if you don't mind." "I don't mind," Caleb shrugged. Grace was silent, looking at the floor, but then raised her eyes. "Are you really just friends with her?" she asked, no longer joking. "Because if it's more, I don't mind, Dad." "Grace," he began, but she interrupted. "No, listen," her voice became firmer. "I'm serious. You deserve to be happy. After everything Mom has done, if Rebecca makes you the way you are today, smiling, normal, then I'm all for it, even if it's not just friendship." Jackson looked at her, not knowing what to say. His 14-year-old daughter, with her harshness and stubbornness, suddenly said what he himself was afraid to admit. He didn't think of Rebecca as anything more, or maybe he did, but he pushed those thoughts away because so little time had passed. She was a bright spot, a support, but he didn't allow himself to look any further. Not after Melissa. Not after everything. "Thank you, Grace," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "But for now, we're just friends." "I'm not ready." "Well, you understand." "I understand," she nodded. "But if anything, I said my word. You shouldn't be alone." Caleb moved closer to his sister, looking at his father. "And I also want you to smile," he said quietly. "Like today, you were as cheerful as before." Jackson felt a lump forming in his throat. He stood up, walked over to the sofa, sat down between the children, and hugged them, Grace with one arm, Caleb with the other. They didn't resist, not even Grace, who usually shrugged off such gestures. "You are my best, you know," he said, looking at them. "I smile because of you. And Rebecca, she just helps. But you are the main thing." "We know," Grace snorted, but pressed herself a little closer to him. "You're okay too, Dad." "Yeah," Caleb nuzzled his side. "You are the best." They sat like that for several minutes, in silence broken only by Harry's distant snoring from the guest room. Jackson felt their warmth, their trust, and it was more than he could ask for. The conversation about Rebecca didn't go exactly as he had planned, but maybe that was for the best. The children accepted her not as a new mother, but as part of their lives, and it lifted a weight off of him that he didn't even know he had. "Okay," he said finally, releasing them. "Go to bed. Tomorrow is school." Oh, Caleb grimaced, but stood up, stealing his glass. Grace stood up behind her, giving her father one last look. "Good night, Dad," she said, "and think about what I said." "I'll think about it," he nodded. "Good night." They went upstairs, and Jackson was left alone in the living room. He leaned back on the sofa, looking at the ceiling. Grace said, "You deserve to be happy." These words were spinning in my head, clinging to something deep. He didn't think about happiness, only about survival, about children, about fighting Melissa. But today, at the cinema, with Rebecca, Harry, and the children, he felt it faint, but real. And maybe Grace is right. Maybe he really deserved more than just hanging on. He took out his phone and opened a chat with Rebecca. His fingers froze over the screen, but then he wrote, "Thank you for today. The kids are delighted. Me too." The answer came almost immediately. "Glad to hear. They're great. And so are you. Good night, Jackson." He smiled, looking at her words. Just friends, he told himself. But somewhere inside, something else stirred, warm, timid, which he was not yet ready to give a name. He turned off the light and went to bed. It's been 5 months since Melissa filed for divorce, and the day has finally arrived. Jackson sat in the county courtroom, dressed in an unusual suit that Harry had insisted he buy to make him look serious. Next to him was Bob Carter, his lawyer, leafing through a folder of documents and muttering something under his breath. Across the aisle sat Melissa with her lawyer, a thin woman in a sharp gray suit whose eyes sparkled with cold confidence. Grace and Caleb waited in the hallway. With Harry, the judge had decided that their presence in the courtroom was unnecessary until it came to their testimony. Jackson nervously rubbed his hands on his pants. He knew the laws of the United States. Only in general terms, divorce in their state, Ohio, was governed by the principle of no fault, which meant that the court would not delve into the reasons for their breakup, such as her infidelity. But custody, alimony, and division of property depended on many factors: income, living conditions, and the wishes of the children. Bob assured him that they were in a strong position, but Jackson still felt his heart pounding in his chest. The judge, an elderly woman with a tired face and a stern voice, entered the courtroom. Everyone stood up. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and announced, "Case number 24, Dr. 567, divorce of Jackson Edward King and Melissa Ann King." I asked the lawyers to introduce themselves. "Robert Carter, I represent the plaintiff, Jackson King." Bob nodded to the judge. "Elizabeth Thorne, representing the defendant, Melissa King." Melissa's lawyer responded, her voice sharp as a blade. The judge flipped through the documents, then looked at both sides. "Let's start with the issue of custody of minor children. Grace Elizabeth King, 14 years old, and Caleb James King, 8 years old. Mrs. Thorne, you have the floor." Elizabeth stood up, squaring her shoulders. "Your Honor, my client, Melissa King, is seeking full custody of the children. She is their mother and has an emotional connection with them, which was temporarily interrupted due to personal circumstances. Mrs. King now lives in a stable environment, has a flexible job, and is committed to providing care and support for her children. We are also asking for the right to a family home, as this will provide the children with a familiar environment and child support from Mr. King for their upkeep." The judge nodded, writing something down, then looked at Bob. "Mr. Carter." Bob stood up and straightened his tie. "Your Honor, my client, Jackson King, also requests full custody. He had been the children's primary caregiver for the past 5 months after Mrs. King voluntarily left the family to live with another man. Mr. King maintained stability for Grace and Caleb, providing them with housing, education, and emotional support. The children expressed a clear desire to remain with their father, which, according to Ohio law, must be taken into account, especially in the case of Grace, whose age allows the court to take her opinion into account. We ask that Mr. King keep the house, since he was paying the mortgage, and that no alimony be awarded to Mrs. King, given her income and voluntary departure from the family." The judge raised an eyebrow, looked at Jackson, then at Melissa. "Fine. I want to hear evidence from the parties. Mr. King, let's start with you." Jackson stood up, feeling his legs shake. Bob had prepared him in advance, but speaking in front of the judge was like stepping into an abyss. "Your Honor," he began, trying to keep his voice even, "I love my children. When Melissa left, I stayed with them. I take them to school, cook them, help with homework. Grace plays volleyball. Caleb goes to art class. I organize it all. I'm not perfect, but I try. They don't want to live with their mother because she abandoned them. I don't mind her seeing them, but they have to stay with me. This is their home. I pay my mortgage and work at my auto repair shop. I don't want child support from her. I just need the children to be with me." He sat up, feeling sweat running down his back. The judge nodded without saying anything and turned to Melissa. Mrs. King. Melissa stood up, her hands shaking slightly, but her eyes firm. Your Honor, I admit that I made a mistake. I left, but realized it and came back. I am their mother, and I miss them. I have a stable job in an office. I rented an apartment not far from their school. I can give them the love and care they have been missing. Jackson is a good father, but he is too busy with work. I want my children to live with me in the house where they grew up. I'm not trying to take them away from him completely. I may agree to joint custody, but most of the time they should be with me. She sat up, glancing quickly at Jackson. He clenched his teeth, holding back the urge to object. Too busy, it was she who went to Dan while he was holding everything to himself. The judge made another note. I want to hear the children's opinion. Invite Grace and Caleb. The door opened and Harry led the children into the hall. Grace walked ahead, her face tense but determined. Caleb held his grandfather's hand, looking at the floor. They sat down on the bench next to the court clerk. The judge looked at them, softening her voice. Grace, tell me where you want to live and why. Grace stood up, glancing at Melissa and then at Jackson. I want to live with Dad, she said firmly. He was always with us. When Mom left, he didn't leave us. I don't want to live with her. She betrayed us, went to someone else. I don't trust her. Dad works, yes, but he's always there when I need him. I feel safe with him. The judge nodded and wrote it down. Thank you, Grace. Caleb, what about you? Caleb stood up, his voice quieter but clear. I want to go with Dad too. He's good. Mom left and I was sad, but Dad took care of me. I miss my mother sometimes, but I don't want to live with her. I'm afraid that she will leave us again. I want to stay home with Dad and Grace. Melissa pursed her lips, her eyes sparkled, but she remained silent. Jackson felt the tension in his chest release a little. The children chose him. That was the main thing. The judge looked at the lawyers. Are there any witnesses or additional evidence? Elizabeth Thorne stood up. We have testimony from Mrs. King's colleague confirming her stable income and willingness to care for her children. We also provided photos of her new apartment. It is suitable for living with children. Bob stood up in response. Your Honor, we have financial records showing that Mr. King has paid 80% of his home's mortgage and all of his children's expenses for the past 5 months. There is also correspondence between Mrs. King and Mr. King, where she confirms that she left voluntarily and had no interest in the children until recently. Most importantly, the children clearly expressed their desire to remain with their father, consistent with Ohio Code Section 3109.04, the best interests of the child. The judge leafed through the papers that the secretary handed over and thought. The hall froze in silence, broken only by the rustle of her hand. Jackson looked at her, feeling the seconds drag on like years. Finally, she raised her head. I will make a decision. Based on Ohio Code Section 3109.04, the court considers the children's best interests, their attachment to their parents, the stability of their environment, and their own preferences if they are mature enough to do so. Grace, at the age of 14, has made her opinions clear and they carry weight. Caleb, although younger, also made his desire clear. Mr. King provided stability for the children after Mrs. King left, as evidenced by the documents and their testimony. Mrs. King, despite her current conditions, did not maintain contact with the children for 3 months after leaving, which undermines her position as the primary carer. She paused and looked at both sides. Full custody of Grace and Caleb is awarded to Jackson King. Melissa King is granted visitation rights every other weekend and 1 evening per week, as agreed upon by Mr. King. The family home remains with Mr. King as he was the main contributor to the mortgage and provides a familiar environment for the children. Mrs. King is not receiving any child support given her income and her lack of financial support for her children in recent months. Mr. King also does not have to pay child support to Mrs. King because her departure was voluntary and she has not proven financial dependence. The judge hit her gavel. Case closed. Jackson exhaled, feeling the tension release from his shoulders. Bob patted him on the back, grinning. I told you, we'll make them, he whispered. Melissa sat motionless, her face pale, her eyes downcast. Elizabeth whispered something to her, but she did not react. Jackson stood up, giving her one last look. He felt no triumph, only fatigue and relief. The children stayed with him. The house remained with him. It was a victory, but it was not warm. In the hallway, Grace rushed to him, hugging him so tightly that he almost staggered. "Did we win?" she asked, looking up. "Yes," he smiled, hugging her back. "You stay with me." Caleb ran after him and grabbed his leg. "Will Mom come?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sometimes," Jackson stroked his head. "But you will live with me." Harry walked over, leaning on his cane, his eyes sparkling. "Well done, son," he said hoarsely. "I knew you wouldn't give them up." "Thanks, Dad," Jackson shook his hand. "I couldn't have done it without you and Bob." The first weekend after the court decision came too quickly. Jackson stood at the living room window, watching Melissa's car pull up to the house. This was her first official day of visitation Saturday morning until Sunday evening, as the court ruled. He felt the tension squeezing his chest, but tried to control himself. The children knew about her arrival. He warned them on Wednesday to give them time to prepare. Caleb took the news calmly, even with slight curiosity, but Grace was like a storm, ready to break out. The doorbell rang sharply, echoing through the house. Jackson opened the door. Melissa stood in the doorway, dressed in a simple jacket and jeans, her face pale but collected. She tried to smile. "Hi, Jack," she said quietly. "I'm looking for the children." "They know," he nodded, stepping aside. "Caleb is ready. Grace, not sure." Melissa pursed her lips but said nothing. Jackson turned towards the stairs. "Guys, Mom has arrived," he shouted. Caleb came down first, a small backpack slung over his shoulder. He approached Melissa, looking at her with cautious interest. "Hi, Mom," he said, smiling slightly. "Are we going somewhere?" "Yes, honey." She knelt down in front of him, her voice softening. "I was thinking we could go to the park and then eat pizza. How do you like it?" "Cool," Caleb nodded, and Melissa hugged him, holding him close. Jackson noticed how her shoulders relaxed. She clearly missed her son. But Grace didn't show up. Jackson shouted again. "Grace, come down." Silence. Then footsteps were heard, but not down, but somewhere above. He sighed and glanced at Melissa. "Wait here," he said, and went up the stairs. Grace was sitting in her room. The door was closed. Jackson knocked, then entered. She stood by the window, arms crossed, her face stony. "Grace, Mom is waiting," he said softly. "It's time to go." "I won't go." Her voice was as hard as steel. "She can take Caleb, but I'll stay here." "Grace," he stepped closer, "this is not discussed." The judge said. "I don't care what the judge said." She turned to him, her eyes sparkling. "She left us, Dad. Now I have to pretend everything is fine? No, I won't go with her." Jackson opened his mouth to protest, but stopped himself. He saw that pain in her eyes, the same one that was hiding behind her harshness from the very beginning. She wasn't just angry at Melissa, she was afraid of trusting again and losing. He sighed and rubbed his face with his hands. "Okay," he said finally, "I'll talk to her. But this is not the end, Grace. You must find common ground." "They shouldn't," she muttered, but her shoulders sagged slightly. He went downstairs. Melissa stood with Caleb, holding his hand. She looked up, noticing the expression on Jackson's face. "Grace doesn't want to go," he said bluntly. "She stays." Melissa frowned, her hand gripping Caleb's backpack. "Jack, this is my time with them," she began, but he interrupted. "I know, but I won't force her. Caleb is ready. Grace can't yet. Give her time." She looked at him, then at the stairs, where Grace had not appeared. Her face tensed, but she nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. "Let's go, Cal." Caleb glanced at his father, then at the stairs, but went with Melissa. Jackson closed the door behind them, feeling a mixture of relief and guilt. He did not want to be a mediator in this war, but there was no choice. An hour after Melissa left, Jackson's phone blinked. Message from Rebecca. "Hi, How are you? Today is the day off. How are the kids and mom? He answered while sitting on the sofa. Caleb left with her. Grace went on strike, stayed home. Wow, is she okay? I'm not sure. She's angry, but it's more than anger. It's hard for her. A minute later, the answer came. Maybe I can pick her up for the day. Ladies' day off, shopping, ice cream, all that stuff. I'll talk to her. You could use a break. Jackson smiled, feeling warm at her offer. That would be great. Thanks, Rebecca. You're welcome. I'll pick you up in an hour. He went up to Grace and knocked on the door. Grace, Rebecca wants to take you for the day, he said, looking into the room. Take a walk, go shopping. What do you say? Grace looked up from her phone, her gaze wary but curious. Seriously? She asked. Just the two of us. Yes, he nodded. I think it will do you good. She shrugged, but the corner of her mouth twitched. Okay, better than sitting here. Rebecca arrived exactly an hour later, wearing jeans and a light sweater, with a smile that immediately relieved some of the tension from Jackson. Grace came down wearing her favorite sweatshirt and her hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. She looked calmer, but her eyes still showed the storm inside. Hey, Grace, Rebecca waved to her. Are you ready for adventure? Yeah, Grace nodded, glancing at her father. Don't be bored here, Dad. I'll try. Maybe I'll even get some sleep at last without your eternal pata-app, he smiled. Good luck to you. They left, and Jackson was left alone in the house, feeling a strange silence. He trusted Rebecca. She knew how to find an approach to people, and maybe she would be able to reach Grace where he himself could no longer cope. Rebecca took Grace to a shopping center on the outskirts of town. They started with shopping nothing serious, just wandering around the shops, trying on stupid hats, laughing at bright t-shirts with ridiculous slogans. Grace was wary at first, but gradually relaxed. Rebecca bought her a bracelet with a small star pendant just because, she said. Grace smiled as she placed it on her wrist. Then they went to an ice cream parlor. Grace chose chocolate with nuts, Rebecca vanilla with caramel. They sat by the window, looking at the passers-by, and for the first time that day, the conversation became serious. How are things with Mom? Rebecca asked, taking a spoonful of ice cream. You stayed at home today. Grace tensed, but didn't look away. I don't want to see her, she said quietly. She left, and now she's back as if nothing happened. I can't trust her. Rebecca nodded, her face calm and non-judgmental. I understand, she said. It's hard when adults do something that breaks everything. But you know, we adults are sometimes stupider than children. We make mistakes, thinking that we can correct them in one fell swoop. She's your mom, Grace, and she's probably really sorry. So what? Grace squeezed the spoon. It doesn't change what she did. She left us for some guy, and now he wants me to pretend that everything is fine. No one asks you to pretend. Rebecca looked into her eyes. You have the right to be angry. You have the right not to forgive. But she's still your mom. No one will replace her, neither me nor anyone else. This doesn't mean you should run to her now. Just think about it. Maybe eventually you'll want to give her a chance. Not for her, but for yourself. Believe me, there will be moments when you need her. This is their war with Dad, not yours, but it's a shame that it couldn't have happened without you. Grace was silent, looking at her plate. Her eyes sparkled, and she blinked quickly, trying to hide her tears. Rebecca noticed this, and her own throat tightened. She reached out, covering Grace's hand with hers. Hey, she said quietly, everything is fine. It's okay to cry. Grace shook her head, but the tears flowed anyway. She dropped the spoon and covered her face with her hands. I'm so tired, she managed. She left, and I thought I could handle it, but I'm angry all the time. And I miss her, but I don't want her to come back. It's stupid, right? No, Rebecca wiped a tear from her cheek. She couldn't help herself, seeing this girl, so strong and so vulnerable. It's not stupid. You hide the pain behind all this anger, and I see how hard it is for you. I'm sorry, Grace. You shouldn't have gone through this. Grace sobbed as she looked at her. Why are you crying? she asked, wiping her face with her sleeve. Because I feel sorry for you, Rebecca smiled through her tears. You are so brave and strong, but you are only 14, and I know what it's like to be let down by adults. They sat like that for several minutes, crying together until the tears dried up. Grace finally wiped her face with a napkin, sniffling. You're great, she said quietly. Thank you for not making me feel like a fool. You're not stupid, Rebecca squeezed her hand. You are stronger than you think, and you will figure it out. Over time. Grace nodded, looking at her bracelet. She didn't answer, but Rebecca could see that her words were getting through. Maybe not today, but Grace will think about them later. About Melissa. About myself. They returned home in the evening. Jackson met them at the door, noticing Grace's red eyes, but didn't ask. Rebecca glanced at him, nodding slightly. Everything is fine. Thank you, he said quietly as Grace went upstairs. You're welcome, Rebecca smiled. She can handle it. She just needs time. He walked her to the car, feeling gratitude that he couldn't express in words. Sunday came to an end, and the warm autumn evening enveloped the Jackson house in the soft light of sunset. He stood at the living room window, watching Melissa's car pull up on the porch again. The first official weekend of her visit had passed, and Caleb was returning home. Jackson felt strangely relieved, not because he didn't trust Melissa, but because the house felt empty without Caleb, despite Grace's presence. She had spent Saturday with Rebecca and Sunday at home, mostly in her room, but her mood had improved markedly since their conversation. Jackson didn't ask for details, he trusted Rebecca, and saw that Grace had become a little softer, a little calmer. The doorbell rang, and he opened the door. Melissa stood in the doorway, holding Caleb's hand. The boy looked pleased, with a slight blush on his cheeks and a backpack filled, apparently, with new drawings. Melissa smiled, but her eyes were tired. The weekend with Caleb seemed to have worn her out more than she expected. Hey, Jack, she said, releasing Caleb's hand. He had a good time. We went to the park, ate pizza, even went to the game room. Cool, Jackson nodded, looking at his son. How are you, champion? Cool, Caleb beamed. Mom bought me a set of pencils, and I drew a robot from a cartoon. You'll show me later. Jackson patted him on the head, then looked at Melissa. Thank you for bringing him on time. Of course, she nodded, hesitating a little. Grace still hasn't changed her mind. No, he shrugged. She stayed. She needs time. Melissa looked down, but didn't say anything. Caleb ran into the house, shouting, Grace, I'm home. Jackson stepped back, gesturing for Melissa to enter. She hesitated, but stepped inside. Everyone had already gathered in the living room. Grace had come down the stairs. Harry was sitting in his favorite chair with a mug of tea, which he had brewed for himself, declaring that your coffee is rubbish. Caleb threw his backpack on the sofa and began to rummage through it, fishing out his drawings. Grace walked up to her father, glancing briefly at Melissa. Her face was calm, but a shadow of tension flashed in her eyes. She cleared her throat, getting Jackson's attention. Dad, she began, her voice was even, but a little louder than usual. We have an event at school in 2 weeks. I play on a volleyball team. There will be a match and stuff. Do you mind if I invite Mom? Jackson froze, surprised by her words. He expected anything, but not this. Grace hadn't spoken to Melissa since she'd returned, and her weekend strike was proof of that. He looked at his daughter, trying to understand what was behind this decision, but her face remained impenetrable. No problem, he said finally, trying to sound natural. If you want, invite me. Grace nodded, then turned to Melissa, who was standing at the door, clearly not expecting such a turn. Her eyes widened, but she quickly pulled herself together. Mom, Grace looked at her directly, come if you can. 20th at 6 in the evening. In the school gym. Melissa swallowed, her voice shaking. Of course, Grace. I'll come. Thank you for calling. Grace smiled a little, not warm, but not cold either, just a hint of something in between. Then she turned back to Jackson, and her tone became a little light, almost playful. And yes, Dad, she added, raising her voice so everyone could hear. I also invited Rebecca. She said she would come. Jackson felt his face warm. He didn't expect Grace to mention Rebecca like this in front of Melissa, but her words made him smile. He nodded, trying to hide his slight embarrassment. Great, he said. The more fans there are, the better. Melissa frowned, her gaze darting from Grace to Jackson. Rebecca, she asked. Her voice was cautious, but in it there was a sense of curiosity. Who is this? Before Jackson could respond, Harry cleared his throat, setting his mug down on the table. He sat up straight in his chair, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Rebecca, he said loudly, with obvious pleasure, this is, I hope, my future daughter-in-law. Harry grinned, clearly enjoying the moment. Jackson rolled his eyes, feeling his face flush. Melissa froze, her lips pressed into a thin line, but she quickly lowered her gaze, hiding her emotions. Grace giggled, covering her mouth, and Caleb, not quite understanding what he was talking about, simply smiled. Dad, Jackson shot Harry a reproachful look. Don't start. And what? Harry shrugged, his grin widening. It's true. She suits you, son, and the children love her. We're just friends. Jackson raised his hands, trying to stop this conversation. Let's not make a big deal. Melissa coughed to get her attention. I see, she said quietly. Her voice was even, but there was a hint of tension in it. Glad you have support, Jack. He looked at her, not knowing what to answer. There was no anger in her words, but there was no warmth either, just a statement. Jackson nodded, deciding not to pursue the topic. Caleb, show me your drawings, he said, changing the subject. Let's see what you drew there. Caleb enthusiastically pulled the papers out of his backpack, laying them out on the table. The conversation turned to robots, pizza, and the park, and the tension in the room eased a bit. Melissa stayed a few more minutes, listening to Caleb's stories, but soon said goodbye, taking one last look at Grace. See you at the concert, she said, and Grace nodded in response. The door closed behind her, and the house was filled with the usual silence again. Harry finished his tea, Grace went upstairs, and Caleb continued to chat about his pencils. Jackson sat down on the couch, feeling the day leave a strange aftertaste behind it. 2 weeks have passed. The day of the concert at Grace School came with a lot of noise and bustle. Jackson stood at the entrance to the gym, helping Caleb not to drop his homemade sign that read, Grace is a champion. The hall was full parents, teachers, students, everyone was buzzing in anticipation of the match and performances. Harry had already taken a seat in the front row, grumbling that these chairs are for children, not old people, but his eyes sparkled with pride. Rebecca arrived first. She entered the hall, dressed in a light coat and scarf, with a smile that immediately caught Jackson's eye. She waved to him as she made her way through the crowd. Hello, she said, approaching. Are you late? No, just right, he smiled back. Grace will be glad to see you. Me too, Rebecca nodded to Caleb. Cool poster, champ. Thank you, Caleb Prociel. I wrote it myself. They walked to their seats, and Jackson noticed how Rebecca easily fit into their small group. She joked with Caleb, teased Harry, and even in this chaotic room, her presence was like an anchor, calm, warm, reliable. Melissa arrived later, a little out of breath. She found them in the crowd. Her gaze flickered to Rebecca, but she quickly looked away. Jackson introduced them to each other, trying to keep the tone neutral. Melissa, this is Rebecca, he said. Rebecca, this is Melissa, Grace, and Caleb's mom. Nice to meet you. Rebecca extended her hand, her smile sincere but reserved. Mutually, Melissa shook her hand, but her voice was strained. She sat down next to Caleb, away from Rebecca, and buried her face in the concert program. The match began and Grace walked onto the court in her volleyball uniform. She was focused, her movements precise and fast. Jackson screamed along with Caleb. Harry slammed his cane on the floor. Rebecca applauded, and Melissa watched silently, but her eyes followed her daughter's every move. When Grace scored the game-winning goal, the crowd erupted in applause, and Jackson noticed Melissa smile for the first time that evening. After the match, there was a small concert, a school orchestra, dancing, performances. Grace took the stage with a team to receive their award for their victory. She looked at her family in the crowd, waved to them, and Jackson felt pride mixed with something more. This was her moment, and they were all here for her strange, broken, but still family. When it was all over, they gathered at the exit. Grace ran up, her face glowing with joy. "Did you see how I scored?" she asked, looking at everyone at once. "Of course we saw it." Caleb jumped. "You were like a superhero. You did well, honey." Melissa stepped forward, her voice soft. "I'm proud of you." Grace looked at her, and for a second something warm flashed in her eyes. She nodded. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "You were amazing," Rebecca added, smiling. "A real star." "Thank you, Rebecca," Grace smiled back, and Jackson noticed how easily she accepted her words. Harry stood up, leaning on his cane. "Well, heroine, shall we go home to celebrate?" he said. "I demand pizza at your expense, Jack." We agreed, Jackson laughed. They went outside. The night was cool but clear. Melissa said goodbye, hugging Caleb and glancing briefly at Grace. "See you in 2 weeks," she said. And, "Thank you, Grace." Grace nodded without saying anything else, but that was enough. Melissa went to her car, while Jackson, Rebecca, Grace, Caleb, and Harry headed to their pickup truck. The house was warm and noisy. The pizza they had ordered on the way lay on the table. Caleb was telling Harry about the match, waving his arms, and Grace was sitting next to Rebecca, showing her a photo from her phone. Jackson watched them, feeling something inside him finally let go. It was not the end, but the beginning new, uncertain, open. Later, after the kids had gone to bed and Harry had dozed off in his chair, Jackson and Rebecca stayed in the kitchen, cleaning up the leftovers from dinner. She stood at the sink, washing dishes, and he dried them with a towel. "Good evening," she said, glancing at him. Grace was happy. "Yes," he nodded. "And you helped her feel it." "Thank you." "You're welcome," she smiled. He looked at her, feeling her words sink somewhere deep. They were friends, he told himself that over and over again. But there was something in her eyes, in her voice, that made his heart beat a little faster. He didn't answer, he just came up, took her into his arms, and kissed her. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.